Great, thanks. Welcome, everybody. I'm Pierre Petit de Pasquale. I'm the Standards Director at IRMA, and thanks for being with us today. This stakeholder feedback webinar or live consultation event is part of a series of live consultations that we have been hosting and organizing since December last year to inform the IRMA standard revision process. And we have been covering quite a vast number of topics or specificities, sometimes sectors that are of interest for the IRMA standard. And today we'll be talking about a very important chapter in the IRMA standard for responsible mining, namely occupational health and safety. If we go to the next slide, please. Thanks. The agenda for today, I'll be sharing with you some of the basic rules for the session. I'll tell you how you can actually contribute to the revision process during this live consultation. I'll tell you a bit more about the revision process itself, the rationale and how is it going and happening. And then we'll dive into this chapter on occupational health and safety with an overview of the proposed changes from the current IRMA standard to the new draft standard that is currently open for public comment. And then we'll have time at the end for questions and a live discussion if you have things you want to share and if it still needs some clarification. So the rules for today, this event is hosted by IRMA, the Initiative for Responsible Mining Assurance. It is being recorded, and the recording will be made publicly available on our website, on our YouTube channel, as with all the other sessions and topics that we've covered until now. So if you are interested in learning more about the IRMA standard, the new draft standard, on the other topics that we've covered, such as water management, waste management, indigenous people's rights, greenhouse gases, etc., etc., you can find them online, recording of the past sessions. And we still have 3 more sessions happening this week at the same time of the day, which is more convenient for large parts of Europe, Africa, Asia, and Pacific countries. I need to remind you that you may not post any unlawful, offensive, threatening, defamatory, obscene, or objectionable content today. Please do not post or send or link any hateful, degrading, criminal, or sensitive imagery or content, nor advocate or promote intolerance or hate against other people. And I also remind you not to post or send any spam content. So why am I saying this? If we go to the next slide, you'll see that the chat function is open today, and this is why I'm reminding you this very important sort of legal terms. So this event is a live consultation. As I said, it represents one of the many channels and platforms and spaces that we are creating to allow everybody, all stakeholders, to contribute to the IRMA standard revision process. And that includes a dedicated online platform, which is, I think, and has been really our preferred channel at the moment. I'll tell you more about it in a minute. But so for today's purpose, you can use either the chat function. This is open. It's enabled for everybody to share content with the whole audience, with me if you have questions or comments or recommendations. But please note that the chat cannot be used in an anonymous way. So if you use the chat, your name will be visible. If we go to the next slide, you'll see that this is unlike the Q&A function, which is the other feature of IRMA, of Zoom that you can use today. The icon is located at the bottom of your screen or in the top right corner if you're on a smartphone. And you can use the Q&A anytime as I go along. You can actually start now if you already have comments or if you have had a chance to read the draft IRMA standard or thanks to your own experience with the IRMA standard. So sharing comments, suggestion, feedback, question, concern, recommendation, don't hesitate. And here you can share content in an anonymous way. There's an option that reads send anonymously, and you can simply tick this option before sending content. And I wanted to reassure you and clarify that all the content that you share with us today, so either via the chat or the Q&A function, will be saved and considered by IRMA as part of the standard revision process. It would completely be taken into account equally as any other contribution that will be coming through, the dedicated online platform or other communication channels. So please feel free to use those two functions anytime. So the IRMA revision process itself, I've been mentioning it now a number of times. So if we go to the next slide, I'll tell you in a nutshell why we're doing this revision of our standard. So you may know that the IRMA standard for responsible mining, which is the one standard that is official and currently enforced by IRMA, was launched in 2018. So it's been 5 years now. So IRMA has been conducting a comprehensive revision of the standard and other standards that were in the making. And this revision process really allows us to ensure the IRMA system remains accountable to all sectors, all our stakeholder groups, in particular the six houses that govern IRMA as an organization, so namely mining companies, organized laborers, affected communities, NGOs, finance, and the purchasers, so the end, um, the downstream customers of metals, minerals. This revision also allows us to make sure the system and the IRMA standard remains up to date. It's a great opportunity for us to add clarity where it's needed, to make the standard clearer, more accessible, more auditable also as well. It's a wonderful opportunity for us to add consistency and better align and make more consistent the different chapters that are similar throughout the standard, and always striving to embed in the standard and in all these chapters good and sound management systems, practice, and models. And lastly, it's also an opportunity for us to fill any gaps around significant environmental or social issues where the IRMA standard, for example, may have fallen behind over the last 5 years. And I'll be saying a bit more about it also in a later slide. One thing that is very important with this revision process, and something that IRMA has been really, working on for a number of years now, and it's really materializing now, we are evolving to address more and to address key phases of the mineral supply chain. So building on this 2018 IRMA standard for responsible mining that really looks at the mining operations themselves, extraction of metals, minerals. And if we click one more time, you'll see that we published in 2021 two draft standards to address other phases of the supply chain. So the IRMA Ready draft standard was developed and has been developed to cover mineral exploration and development. And the draft standard for responsible mineral processing that was also released in 2021 for public comment, obviously looks at the mineral processing. So the next steps, the next sort of separation of the ore and the minerals. And if we just go to the previous slide, sorry, as a summary, what you see on the right-hand side, this orange cover is the draft standard for responsible mining and mineral processing 2.0. This is the draft that is open for public comment. And why have we done that? Well, realizing the huge amount of overlap and synergies between these three standards and draft standards. it actually made a lot of sense and was more logical, efficient, and meaningful to integrate them together and have only one standard able to cover these three key phases. So if we go to the next slide, this draft that I just mentioned, and you've seen the cover, what is it? First of all, this is not a finally approved, board approved standard. It's really what the board has approved is the rational and has approved it as an invitation for comments from everybody, from all stakeholders on all the content. So the specific requirements, of course, but also the more general IRMA principles, the approach to best practice, the critical requirements, really the mechanics of the standard are also up for discussion, comment, and we are extremely flexible and eager to hear from you and hear your recommendations so that all together we can make the IRMA standard even stronger and more adequate for your needs and demands. To make the draft standard more meaningful and understandable, we have included lots of notes, drafters notes. So at the beginning of each chapter, you will find, and maybe you've already had a chance to look at it and you've seen summaries of the changes that are proposed between the 2018 version and this new, so 2023 draft that we've put out last year. And then at the level of each requirement, there are also substantial notes that explain why we're proposing these changes and linking this back to what I showed before on these, various opportunities to remain up to date, to add clarity, to add consistency, fill gaps. Well, this is explained for every requirement, the rationale. We have also included throughout the document, you'll see them in blue, consultation questions. So as I said, you can comment on everything. If you have recommendations or critiques or concerns or questions on anything, please feel free to share with us. But we have sort of pulled out some more challenging, sometimes controversial questions or issues that have been raised along this revision journey. And these questions we would really love to hear from you in particular to help us resolve them or find the sort of best solution to address everybody's need. There is also an Excel version if you prefer using a tabular form of the standard. Sometimes that's easier. And also the whole draft standard has been translated into Spanish. So you can also download the draft standard in Spanish. Everything is on our website under the section that is called resources. I'll be putting more links in the chat. If we go to the next slide, yes, thanks. To also explain or clarify that, I've been talking about this revision process. Actually, it's been a really ongoing and live process over a number of years. And we have learned really a lot from some of the first and the initial IRMA independent audits that have been taking place. So you may know that IRMA has published already 4 public audit reports. So mining operations that have been independently assessed by third-party audit firms against the IRMA standard. But we have, I think now in total about 14 or 16 more. And a number of them are actually being finalized as we speak and will be available very soon publicly. So this whole process, learning in particular from the auditing firms, from the implementing companies, and the myriad of stakeholders that were engaged during these processes has been instrumental in informing the revision. We've also spent time, reviewing other standards, a number of new standards that have emerged, but also other existing and established standards that have that have been evolving over the last 5 years. We've taken into account how society's expectations and best practice have been evolving as well. We've taken into account all the comments that we received from these two draft standards that we published in 2021 that I mentioned before, the IRMA Ready and the mineral processing draft standards that offered a first attempt by IRMA to cover mineral exploration and development and mineral processing. So using this to really also strengthen this new integrated draft standard. And clearly our ongoing stakeholder engagement activities over the last 5 years and the work of um, some topic-specific expert working groups also over the last years have been very important to inform this draft. So we've published it now in at the end of October last year. So on the 26th of October, we released this draft integrated standard for a 90-day consultation period. So the public comment, public consultation period is open until the end of January. So you have about 10, 11 more days. And there are many ways to participate. This event today and this series of live consultations being one of the, I think, an important way. Um, we have been really, receiving already, I think, a lot of valuable and meaningful content, questions, sometimes answers, recommendations during this session. So again, really inviting you all today to use the chat function and the Q&A function if you want to share content with us. And all the comments that we receive, as I've said it already in the beginning, but I wanted to, re-emphasize that now that they will be considered in an equal and objective manner. There are no sets of comments that are more important than others. And we will be producing a public summary once the public comment period is done and we've, processed all the comments to share, very transparently with the rest of the world what these comments were and how we're proposing to address them. And so it's important if you want your comments to be treated in a confidential manner to let us know. So today, if you're using the Q&A function, there is an option to do exactly that. And if we go to the next slide, you'll see that on this dedicated online platform that I mentioned that you can find at www.responsibleMining.net/comments2, the number 2. And we've really designed it in a way that allows you to go, chapter by chapter. If there are specific requirements or specific consultation questions that you want to answer specifically, you can do that. And there's also a section if you want to share more general or high-level comments. This is also possible. And here on the platform, there's an option to indicate that this contribution should be treated anonymously. Then if we go to the next slide, you'll see the other sort of more traditional communication channels for you to contribute. The email address is comments@responsiblemining.net. Again, you can use it anytime. You can use our WhatsApp line or our physical address as well. Now, let's look at today's really area of focus and interest, the chapter on occupational health and safety. What's happening there? What is it that IRMA is proposing to change? As I said, to remain up to date, to be clearer, more consistent, and fill any gaps. So the objective of this chapter, occupational health and safety, remains unchanged. We have it in a 2018 standard for responsible mining. And the intent is really to ensure that all companies identify and avoid or mitigate occupational health and safety hazards, that they maintain working environments that protect workers' health and working capacity, and that they promote workplace safety and health. This chapter is applicable to all the phases of the mineral supply chain that are now being covered in this integrated standard. So exploration, mining, and mineral processing, and whether at a project stage or operational stage, um, the requirements can be applicable. There's only one sub-requirement that is only relevant for underground mining operations, as it touches on very specific hazards and health situations. As an introduction and really upfront to explain uh, what has been a key driver for IRMA to make changes in this chapter, and really this chapter, although I mean I personally have a feeling that it has been uh, uh, maybe taken for granted by a number of actors and stakeholders for many years, and has not seen substantial changes over the years. In this new draft standard, it is really one of the, if not the chapter, where we're proposing the most substantial changes with quite a lot of new requirements that we are adding. We'll be going through the details, but um, in June 2022, the ILO, the International Labor Organization, held its international convention, and they adopted a very important resolution. It was passed in 2022 to create a new fundamental principle. So a fifth fundamental principle and right, and this one is a principle, a right to a safe and healthy working environment. And so you might ask, why was this not included before? Well, there are other key fundamental principles around, the right to organize, the right to collective bargaining, but somehow, health and safety wasn't a core fundamental principle. And if we go to the next slide, just to say that, this has really been, I think, perhaps an eye-opener for IRMA, and we've realized that there were a number of issues that are now covered under this new principle that are not particularly or explicitly covered in the IRMA standard. And so back to the point that I was mentioning, and many mining companies have really committed to high occupational health and safety standards for a number of years, now for decades. Strong requirements, policies, management standards are in place. And those were captured in the 2018 mining standard, this kind of best practice level. But this new decision, tripartite, strong process at the ILO really led IRMA to reevaluate the requirements. And there were a number of things around the right to stop work under certain circumstances, the right to training, continuous training, and the right to access information on accidents and dangerous situations as well. So that said, if we go to the next slide, you'll see that one of the first things we are proposing for this chapter is to reorganize it a little bit. Coming from this consistency perspective, to make sure the chapter and all chapters actually look like one another a bit more in terms of the flow. So first of all, the requirement for a number of policies and governance elements in place, and then going to the requirements on the identification and assessment of potential hazard and potential health and safety risks, informing the development of management plans and management procedures to address these potential hazards and risks, with a number of very specific measures depending on the context and the situations, into the need for regular inspections, monitoring and evaluation, and health surveillance procedures and actions. There's a need to ensure that the companies are prepared and equipped to respond to unsafe working conditions and unwanted health and safety events. We have a number of requirements around education and training. Then we go to the performance evaluation. So evaluating again on a regular basis the performance of a particular site on health and safety, together with reporting both internal and external. That also informs a number of corrective action plans that need to take place. And we've also added organized a bunch of requirements around the data management, so the internal data management. If we go to the next slide, yeah, so here I've mentioned it in one of the previous slides, how important it is for IRMA to embed in the standards and throughout the chapters good and sound uh, um, management systems, procedures, and approach to really deliver continuous improvement at all sites. And one way to uh, summarize or simplify this operationalization of continuous improvement is often to use this plan, do, check, act cycle, this management cycle. And if we go to the next slide, you'll see that the different elements of the sequence that I mentioned just on the slide before do map to this plan, do, check, act continuous improvement cycle. So all the planning part is really where you need to have these policies, do the risk identification, and develop management plans. That goes into the do part, where the procedures need to be developed, the plans need to be implemented with a number of very specific measures that are, practical, tangible, and adapted to certain situations. The requirements around education and training are also part of the do. This checking element of the plan, do, check, act cycle is where you'll find everything around inspection, monitoring, and evaluation, and reporting to have the data, know what's going on, know how you are doing, know how a site is doing, and then allows you to act. And so be prepared for, unsafe conditions and wanted event, being ready to respond, and also retroactively feed into the plans and the actions that are taken to make sure they are actually efficient. And same with the education and training that also need to be adapted over time to remain adequate and meaningful and efficient. So really not reinventing the wheel and being strongly aligned with, I think, the reality of companies and operators that want to act in a responsible way, know what the performance is, and be able to continuously improve. And in the middle here, you see this block because it's such an important element of the IRMA standard. This transparency dimension is covered here on the reporting and data management to make sure that all the information of public interest is collected and shared also transparently. So we've talked about the format and the structure of the chapter, what we're proposing. Now, in terms of the actual content, there are a number of things that we're proposing in this new draft. Again, if you've already had a chance to look at it and you want to share comments, or if you have questions, don't hesitate to use the chat or the Q&A at any time as I go along. So some of those gaps that we identified, and again, thanks to the work of the ILO and this new principle that has been approved and passed into the convention and the um, main document, we are proposing to add a requirement on a new policy and setting performance targets that are specific. We are also proposing to add a requirement that someone in senior management should be appointed and be accountable for occupational health and safety matters. If we go to the next slide, you'll see that we are proposing to add clarity on particularly contractors and subcontractors and business partners. So there's one new requirement that is proposed, 3.2.1.3, to manage contractors around occupational health and safety risks and matters. And we've also included more references and more clarity uh, throughout this chapter. Clearly, because we received feedback and a number of comments that it was not clear, in particular from the auditors, if and when these requirements and issues were needed also to be looked after by the sites and the operating companies on their contractors. So we've clarified that. We've added a number of additional expectations around the joint committee, the joint health and safety committees, with representatives from the employees and the employers, also to remain up to date. If we go to the next slide, and I'll be saying just a little bit more in the next slide, but we are proposing to separate hazard identification from risk assessment. So also as it is a sort of common practice and good practice in the industry, as in many other sectors actually, to differentiate the identification of all potential hazards, but how can they materialize into potential risks. So you'll see two different requirements here, 3.2.2.1 and 3.2.2.2. And one thing that is very important, I'll be also saying a bit more later on, we're proposing to add an annex with what is intended as a comprehensive set of hazards to be considered during this preliminary scoping work or identification work. So being able to map uh, or compare against the comprehensive list. And we have a few questions about that that I'll be explaining later on. If we go to the next slide, also to add clarity, we are proposing to expand the list of mitigation procedures that should be in place to address specific situations, including situations where infectious diseases are involved. This is not part of this chapter when the requirements around infectious diseases, whereas before it only appeared under chapter 3.3, which looks at health and safety of communities. But now we've also integrated that when it comes to workers' health. Also to remain up to date, make sure it was clear. The emergency response requirements that used to or at the moment in the IRMA standard 2018 appear under chapter 2.5 on emergency preparedness and response. We I don't know if you realize, but we decided that since the vast majority of the requirements under this chapter focused on communities, affected communities that are affected by the operations, to really officialize that. So the chapter 2.5 in the new draft standard, we've renamed it so it reads Community Emergency Preparedness and Response. And the few elements there that touch on the emergency preparedness and response for workers, we've moved them here under occupational health and safety. So everything that is related to workers are now located at, under the same chapter. If we go to the next slide here, a few gaps that we're also proposing to fill. And again, with both this new ILO fundamental principle and all the work and the sort of ongoing engagement that happened over the last 5 years, we're proposing to add requirements on additional procedures related to the right to stop work, more requirements to report, investigate situations, incidents, accidents. We are expanding the requirements that are related to first aid, to worker accommodations, and response to incidents and accidents. And we're proposing to add a number of additional requirements to support worker mental health, uh, including after accidents or situations where workers were affected or involved in accidents and incidents. If we go to the next slide, a couple of other gaps that we're proposing to fill, significantly expanding the bachelor requirements on the training of workers. And we are also proposing to add new expectations around the review and reporting on occupational health and safety performance that you'll find under 3.2.8.2 and 3.2.8.3. One document that I also wanted to mention today, and let me put the link in the chat right now if you haven't seen it or found it. It's available on our website under resources. It's an applicability guidance piece of information. They come in two formats. What you see here, an extract from the Excel spreadsheet. And because this new integrated draft standard, as I've said now a couple of times, offers a wider coverage. So from the very exploration and to project development to the operational mines and also standalone mineral processing, it is very important. And this is really a full part of the draft standard. It's also open for public comment and discussion, but it shows for every single requirement how a requirement can or should not be applicable to a particular stage or phase. So it's small, but the stages that are covered there are the sort of very early exploration stage. So everything that is desk-based, desktop exploration into stage 2 with some of the initial exploration and very initial stakeholder mapping engagement into exploration stage 3 to the project development, the project permitting, and then these situations where we're actually talking about operational mines or operational mineral processes. And you'll see the differences in how it can be applicable or not. And we also have a sort of handbook. So this is the Excel version that you're seeing here, just on occupational health and safety. And then there's a PDF with quite a lot of details actually on what it means in practice to apply a particular requirement to these different stages. So again, very eager to hear more from you, in particular exploration companies and mineral processing companies and all the stakeholders that are interacting with or being affected by exploration and mineral processing. If we go to the next slide, one thing that I wanted to share with you also, I've said it in introduction that it's one of the chapter where we are proposing some of the most substantial changes, I think, and we are proposing quite a number of new requirements. If you look at the absolute numbers between 2018 and this new 2023 version, we are moving from 23 requirements to 39 requirements. So it looks like we're adding 16 new dimensions, but in practice, I don't want to minimize the changes, but you'll see that because we're splitting hazard identification and risk assessment into two requirements, whereas in the 2018 standard, this is covered under a one single requirement. it's not as if we're adding new dimensions or asking companies to do more. It's just being clearer and actually simpler in the sequence. We are proposing to expand the requirements to inform workers, to require clearer procedures, and to require training. But again, these are not brand new dimensions or elements. It's made slightly stronger and more stronger and clearer. Same with first aid, instructions, training, and equipment. So we are making clear what is it that is intended and required around first aid, and how in practice, again, companies can ensure that they fulfill their responsibilities. And also all the training requirements, we are proposing to strengthen them under a number of new individual requirements. But if we go to the next slide, you'll see that in total, that actually means only 6 new elements or dimensions. So there are 6 things, elements that are not covered in the 2018 standard that is now proposed to be covered, not 16. So there's a need for having a policy in place on occupational health and safety, which also seemed just as again, from a consistency perspective with other chapters, and just from a sort of best practice, continuous improvement approach, to have the policy, having a dedicated uh, management system for contractors. One thing that I mentioned before, the procedure on reporting and investigation, respecting the rights of workers to stop work if dangerous conditions exist, and again, under very specific circumstances that are explicitly mentioned and explained in the standard. The annual review of occupational health and safety performance, and the requirement to share some specific stats, so to report them on an annual basis. And again, things that are very, I think, common, and that many companies and operators are doing, sharing the total number of near miss incidents, accidents, injuries, lost time injuries, and fatalities in absolute numbers. So I don't think that any of these, I mean, I'm hoping that none of these, dimensions are coming as a shock or great surprise. These are actually just, I think, gaps that we have identified or have been identified and noticed to us that we want to make sure we are comprehensively covering. I said it in the beginning when I mentioned the draft and the format. We have included throughout the standard and in this chapter as well, a number of consultation questions that I think really need most attention, and that we would love to hear more from you all. I've pulled out a few of them here. Some of the key questions that are still, unresolved. Some of them are quite challenging, or things where we really want to make sure this is the right way forward. So we're proposing a new annex, Annex 3.2a. I mentioned it before, and this annex includes what is intended as a comprehensive set of hazards that need to be considered when doing the scoping of hazards. So the very sort of initial hazard identification, and this is organized under a number of categories of hazards. So safety hazards, chemical hazards, physical hazards, ergonomic hazards, psychosocial hazards, and biological hazards. What we would love you to do, if you haven't done yet, is to look at this annex and see if there are any major potential hazards that have been missed. Or if you think that some of the hazards that we've listed here are just not applicable to exploration or mining or mineral processing operations altogether, and therefore shouldn't be mentioned and included in this list. And also, do you think this is, a good way of organizing information? Should we, reorganize the categories, even the rationale of this, having this annex in the first place? What do you think? Is it a practical solution? Is it a practical tool for companies and also for auditors to know and assess whether the hazard identification and scoping has been done in a responsible and appropriate manner? So one of the very important questions here, I'll be sharing just a few more questions in the next slides. Um, Again, reminding you that you can send, more questions, comments, concerns, recommendations today in the chat and Q&A. We still have, quite some time. So some more key consultation questions that I also wanted to, um, pause on. In the requirement 3.2.3.2, so a little bit similar to having a list of comprehensive hazards that need to be mapped against and assessed. We're proposing a list of hazard categories that always require procedures or controls. So even if an operating company uh, assumes or decides that this particular hazards are not particularly material or they don't present a high level of likelihood, uh, we require also sort of learning from best practice and recommendations from stakeholders that there should be procedures or controls uh, always on specific risks, such as um, risks that are linked to pregnant women, to children, to HIV positive workers, also risks around ground control, physical stability, electrical hazards, hazards that are linked to uh, chemicals, gases, dust, explosives, uh, powered equipment, vehicles, equipment and machinery, pressurized systems of vessels, confined spaces, inundation and inrush of water, working at heights, and materials handling. So, of course, if there are like particular context and types of operations where, for example, there is no um, chemicals and hazardous materials, and I'm thinking of some early exploration projects, for example, or um, some operations where explosives are not being used at the moment or at all, then of course the evidence will be provided that there's no need for actual control mechanisms, but in principle, as a list of universal things that need procedures and control, and I see in the chat someone adding that biological hazards should be included. I'm noting this down. Absolutely, we can expand. But so two questions here. First, do you agree with this approach? Like, should there be a list of categories that necessarily require procedures and control mechanisms? Yes or no? And if so, and I'm assuming that the person saying that biological hazards should be included falls into the second category where you agree that this is good to have a category and you suggest other types of hazards. So thanks for sharing. If we go to the next slide, I also just wanted to share a few more um, consultation questions with you. We have this requirement on this new requirement on reporting and investigation that I mentioned in one of the previous slides. It's 3.2.3.8 in the 2023 draft standard. One, very genuine question that we ask is, though we have seen best practice and we've heard it, during our stakeholder engagement activity, um, do you agree and do you think that it is common to have a procedure related to reporting and investigation of health and safety issues in the workplace? Again, we have identified it as best practice, but we're always open to hearing other opinions and divergent opinions. And if you don't believe that this is something um, that is common and widely deployed and in place, do you think it's useful? Do you think it's not useful? And are there any elements you would add or remove when you look at the actual requirement? So 3.2.3.8. And here we have a number of um, sub-elements around the rights and the responsibilities, the process that need to be followed when the reporting happen, and also that the investigation include a number of elements. You can find that in the full draft. A few other questions when it comes to training workers on first aid. We are suggesting that all workers have at least basic training in first aid. A question here, should there also always be others on site who have a higher level of depth or first aid training or certification? So if all workers got basic training, should there be also another, group, probably smaller group of first aid supervisors or managers that are, specifically trained on first aid at a deeper level? That's one question to make it a requirement. And also from a very practical perspective, some mine sites, some mineral processing operations can be extremely large and employ, thousands and tens of thousands of people. Would it be then, practical and realistic to require that all workers have at least basic training in first aid? And again, potentially talking about, 15,000 workers. And in that case, do you have a suggestion for what might be an adequate number of on-site workers or employees? If this is not realistic to say, the 15,000 people will be trained, should it be a certain percentage or a certain ratio of workers that are trained and have a sort of certification level on first aid and ensure this number is present on site at all times? This kind of core. That's one very practical question that we are also, not sure to have the best answer on, and we'd like to have your answer. And I'm also seeing some more comments in the chat and the Q&A. Someone saying that he agrees to have a procedure. I guess that relates to the reporting and investigation. To ensure that labor and workers reps are also included in the procedure. Thank you very much. Thanks for your contribution. And just two more consultation questions before I end with the presentation. On monitoring and surveillance, there is also a new requirement that is proposed. And so the question is the selection of factors that need to be monitored and surveilled be based on the outcomes of the risk assessment? So once the potential risk have been assessed and identified, or should we also be requiring separate assessments to help inform the monitoring program? So if you do the hazard identification against this comprehensive list of hazard, that inform the risk assessment process, what can actually be a potential risk at the workplace. The current approach, again, we're unclear. We want to make sure we offer the most practical and most logical approach. Should all of these risks have monitoring and surveillance processes, or should there be a separate assessment based on exposure, likelihood, baseline monitoring, to inform and decide, okay, what kind of risks need what kind of monitoring and sometimes potentially some risk where there could be no need for a monitoring program. And we're saying here, it's very small, just a note for me to read out that, for example, in the Responsible Minerals Initiative program, it requires documentation of temperature exposure um, that requires some monitoring of the workplace. So to be able to share that information, it's sort of implicit that by default, there need to be monitoring of exposure to high temperature. So should we be doing the same thing or not? And then lastly, one of the also key consultation questions, this new element on the statistics that need to be reported. And so I mentioned them before, the absolute number of accidents, near misses, injuries, fatalities, and lost time injuries. Are there any other health and safety statistics or metrics that may be relevant to be publicly report also as a default requirement? And I see in the chat there's one more comment on first aid. So the second question that I mentioned should be related to risk and hazard. It shouldn't be an absolute number or percentage. Again, right? Yes, that's a good suggestion. We're going to be taking that into account. Yeah, so clearly depending on the context, the kind of operation, and again, when we think of this new integrated standard, when we can be looking at some early on-site exploration work to small or big mine sites, and also particular mineral processing operations with different processes, different input materials, different, I think, size also of staff. That's a good comment. Right, and if we go to the next slide, just to finish this presentation and I think event, I want to give it, just a couple more minutes if there are more, questions or recommendations. I think we've addressed some of the questions that we had heard before and here today in the session. The public consultation is still open for 11 days. If you need a little bit more time, also don't hesitate. You can reach out to us or to me via the email address, communication channels, and reminding you about the dedicated online platform at responsiblemining.net/comments to. We are, I think, now receiving more and more contributions, so please really use that remaining time to send your contribution and make sure your voice is heard and integrated into the revision process. I'll give it just one more minute, but I think we're all good in terms of comments, questions. I hope this session was informative, was helpful, also to inform your own, thought process and understanding and processing of the draft standard. We look forward to receiving your comments, additional comments, recommendations if you didn't have a chance in the live session today, and if you needed more time, please do so. This session will also be available on our website afterwards if you want to share with colleagues, and reminding you that all the other topics that we've covered, if you want to have a sort of deeper dive and broader understanding of the changes that we're making, they are also available on our website and our YouTube channel. Thank you very much for being with us today. I wish you a good rest of the day wherever you are. Take care. Thank you.